The Book of Boba Fett entered the franchise with the expectation that it would provide a focused narrative, exploring the identity, motivations, and strategic process of a character whose reputation had been shaped almost entirely through implication. The initial promotional framing suggested that the series would center on Boba's attempt to redefine his role in the criminal ecosystem of Tatooine. However, as the episodes unfolded, it became clear that the narrative structure did not position Boba as the primary driver of events. Instead, he occupied a reactive posture that limited his influence on plot progression. The series presented him as a figure who responded to circumstances rather than one who shaped them, revealing a structural disconnect between the show's stated goals and its execution. The early episodes relied heavily on an extended flashback framework designed to contextualize Boba's survival and recovery. Yet this structure introduced pacing challenges that shifted attention away from the present timeline. The flashbacks provided insight into the mechanics of Boba's escape and rehabilitation, but they offered limited development of his new role as a leader attempting to consolidate power. Instead of doubling as a foundation for strategic ambition, these sequences operated as self-contained narratives with minimal connection to later developments. As a result, the momentum of the contemporary storyline weakened, and viewers received more detail about events preceding the main plot than about the central arc advertised by the series. Boba's position within the power dynamics of Tatooine further demonstrated the absence of a cohesive narrative centered on his decision-making. Throughout the series, other characters presented information, threats and opportunities that purportedly required strategic responses, yet the majority of decisions were prompted externally rather than internally initiated. This reactive structure made the character appear as an observer within his own story. He did not set terms, establish agendas, or dictate the pace of conflict. Instead, each development emerged independently of his actions, with Boba responding in ways that maintained minimal influence over long-term outcomes. This pattern suggested that the narrative did not allocate him the agency required for a central protagonist. The show introduced several factions and political actors intended to challenge Boba's authority, yet their function often overshadowed his role. Negotiations with the local families, interactions with regional administrators, and confrontations with criminal groups frequently relied on exposition delivered by supporting characters. These sequences positioned Boba as a participant rather than a strategist. Critical decisions were explained to him, or decided around him, reducing his operational presence. The absence of scenes demonstrating independent planning, resource evaluation, or tactical innovation further weakened the emphasis on Boba's leadership. In effect, the structure assigned him the responsibilities of a ruler without providing the narrative space needed to illustrate how he fulfilled those responsibilities. Attempts to humanize Boba through interpersonal exchanges introduced character depth, but they also limited his narrative authority. The series highlighted his efforts to build alliances and adopt a more collaborative leadership style. Yet these scenes tended to depict him seeking validation or guidance from others. While such interactions can offer nuance, the cumulative effect depicted a protagonist deferring rather than directing. The show framed his approach as tolerant and cooperative, but without demonstrating a strategic foundation behind these choices, the interpretation shifted toward passivity. This portrayal contrasted sharply with the calculated precision associated with his earlier appearances, creating an identity that lacked consistency within the established universe. The introduction of Fennec Shand as a major supporting figure contributed to the dilution of Boba's narrative centrality. Fennec frequently provided direction, identified threats, and executed complex actions that advanced the plot. Although her role added operational competence to the storyline, it also emphasized the gap left by Boba's limited influence. Scenes involving reconnaissance, tactical assessment, and decisive intervention often showcased Fennec rather than Boba, shifting the focus of key developments toward a secondary character. The consequence was a redistribution of narrative weight in which Boba's presence became symbolic rather than instrumental. Visual presentation further reinforced the perception that Boba was not driving the story. Action sequences frequently highlighted broader ensemble coordination rather than individual agency. The choreography emphasized group responses, shifting the spotlight among multiple characters. While this approach expanded the sense of community within the narrative, it also lessened the emphasis on Boba as a distinct force within the environment. Key confrontations relied on collaborative execution rather than personal skill or tactical insight, diminishing the singular impact expected of a lead figure. The visual language supported the ensemble at the cost of the protagonist's prominence. The series attempted to reframe Boba as a leader seeking to build stability, but it provided limited evidence of structured governance or criminal oversight. Scenes depicting administrative duties, economic negotiations, or management of territory were brief and superficial. Without such elements, the audience received little indication of how Boba intended to transform his environment. The absence of sustained exploration of his rule allowed the backdrop of Tatooine to dominate the narrative rather than be shaped by his actions. This dynamic reinforced the impression that the location rather than the character remained the EAT-1's primary focus of the story's development. The conceptual shift from feared bounty hunter to aspiring ruler introduced a narrative opportunity, yet the execution lacked the detailed mapping necessary to demonstrate a coherent transition. The series did not illustrate how Boba's prior experiences informed his new ambitions, nor did it establish a clear framework for how he intended to challenge existing structures. Without a strategic through line, his transformation appeared abrupt rather than grounded in prior characterization. The resulting portrayal offered a thematic premise, without the analytical detail required for meaningful exploration. The Clone Wars era, the criminal underworld, and his prior role in the galaxy provided rich context, yet the series did not integrate these elements into a unified depiction of leadership. The structural impact of these diversions became evident when comparing narrative progression across the season. Episodes centered on Din Djarin presented clear objectives, escalating stakes and defined turning points. In contrast, episodes focusing on Boba exhibited fragmented pacing and limited progression of central themes. By presenting a more dynamic and clearly articulated arc for a character outside the main narrative, the show inadvertently positioned Din as the functional protagonist. This contrast emphasized the lack of forward momentum in Boba's storyline, further reinforcing the perception that he had become secondary within the broader structure. Supporting characters from other series also commanded significant narrative space, shaping key developments without contributing to Boba's long-term objectives. Appearances by figures such as Ahsoka Tano and Luke Skywalker advanced thematic threads tied to the Jedi, the Mandalorians, and the legacy of the New Republic. Yet these elements did not meaningfully intersect with Boba's goals on Tatooine. Their involvement added scope to the shared universe, but it also highlighted the absence of equivalent development for the lead character. The audience received detailed insight into external arcs, while receiving comparatively limited insight into Boba's personal evolution. Even characters directly associated with Boba's storyline often drove progression more effectively than he did. Fennec Shand executed investigative tasks, negotiated strategic positions, and implemented operational plans that shaped the trajectory of the Tatooine conflict. While her role strengthened the ensemble dynamic, it also revealed the narrative void left by Boba's minimal strategic presence. Key confrontations, information-gathering operations, and tactical initiatives frequently centered on Fennec's actions rather than Boba's decisions. This structural distribution of agency produced an environment in which supporting figures generated forward motion, while the lead figure responded to outcomes generated by others. The depiction of Boba's leadership during the conflict with the Pike Syndicate further illustrated the limited advancement of his arc. Although the series positioned him as a ruler defending newly acquired territory, it provided few examples of strategic planning or governance. Meetings with local factions conveyed information, but rarely resulted in decisive action driven by Boba. Instead, many of the pivotal developments emerged from external pressure applied by adversaries or from interventions by allies. Without clear indications of long-term strategy, Boba's role appeared reactive rather than authoritative, reinforcing the perception that he lacked narrative control within his own storyline. The climactic confrontation highlighted these issues by distributing focus across multiple characters rather than centering on Boba's leadership. The battle incorporated contributions from Fennec, Din, the Freetown Militia, and mechanical units. Yet Boba's tactical vision remained underdeveloped. His actions during the conflict did not establish him as the guiding force behind the defense of the territory. Instead, the sequence highlighted the contributions of the ensemble, with Boba serving as one participant among many. This presentation contrasted with expectations of a finale designed to consolidate the main character's arc and demonstrate his strategic competence. The use of the rancor during the final battle offered visual spectacle but limited thematic impact. Although the sequence reinforced Boba's connection to Tatooine's cultural landscape, it operated more as an isolated moment than as a culmination of character development. The narrative did not integrate this element into an overarching strategy or thematic framework. As a result, the sequence functioned primarily as an action set piece, rather than as evidence of Boba's growth or consolidation of power. The absence of narrative integration further emphasized that key developments in the series operated independently of the protagonist's internal trajectory. The resolution of the conflict similarly offered limited expansion of Boba's character. The closing scenes depicted him receiving recognition from local residents, yet the show provided minimal insight into how he intended to govern or develop his territory beyond the immediate aftermath. Without a clear articulation of long-term objectives, the narrative concluded without demonstrating substantial evolution in Boba's leadership model. The open-ended nature of his governance decisions contrasted with the detailed development granted to other characters within the same season. This imbalance reinforced the impression that the series distributed its thematic attention unevenly, favouring external arcs over the main character's progression. The cumulative effect of these structural choices demonstrated that the show prioritised broader franchise continuity over a focused exploration of its titular character. Rather than providing a concentrated examination of Boba Fett's transformation from bounty hunter to territorial leader, the narrative shifted toward advancing storylines that originated outside the series. This redistribution of narrative emphasis created a structural environment in which Boba functioned more as a contextual presence than as a guiding force. His significance became secondary to the universe, rather than central to the series bearing his name. In evaluating the season's overall composition, it becomes clear that Boba Fett's diminished presence was not solely the result of character interpretation, but of narrative architecture. The series integrated multiple arcs, perspectives, and franchise obligations, yet it did not allocate consistent structural priority to the protagonist. The shifting focus revealed that the story's momentum depended more on external characters than on Boba himself. The series expanded the Midcore universe but diluted its own premise. In doing so, it inadvertently transformed its central figure into an observer rather than a driver. The final outcome demonstrates that the show did not fail due to the absence of compelling ideas, but due to the distribution of narrative agency across a structure that did not support its intended lead. The result is a season in which Boba Fett appears not as the architect of the story, but as a participant in a narrative shaped by others.
Thank you for watching. Be sure to like, subscribe, and hit that share button. My main channel is Critical Analysis Hub, where I post Star Wars content about the movies. My secondary channel is Critical Analysis Hub Plus, where I focus on the shows of Star Wars. And my third channel is Critical Analysis Hub XP, where I post comic books. Be sure to take a moment and check them out. Thanks, and may the Force be with you.